Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Hi, everyone. This is Jillian with Court Junkie. Court Junkie is a true crime podcast that covers court cases and criminal trials using audio clips and interviews with people close to the cases. Court Junkie is available on Apple Podcasts and podcastone.com.
Life can be chaotic. If you're running a retail business, don't let disorganized order fulfillment add to the chaos. Use ShipStation instead. With ShipStation, you never have to worry about shipping and fulfillment again. Whether you're running a business out of your garage or you have multiple warehouses, ShipStation is ideal for every phase of your business's growth. Save time with one login for all your stores and by automating repetitive tasks. Plus, you'll save money with the best shipping rates from global carriers. ShipStation's industry-leading features help you deliver a better customer experience. They'll get accurate and faster shipments along with automated tracking updates with your branding. And with up to 88% off UPS and USPS rates and up to 90% off FedEx rates, ShipStation is the fastest and most affordable way to ship. Calm the chaos. Switch to ShipStation today. Start a free trial at shipstation.com/audio. That's shipstation.com/audio.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we look more at the Pablo Velez case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by the most interesante co-host, Alice.
Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Look,
Thank you for calling me interesting. I know it's not your words.
Bilingual podcast now.
I'm sorry.
What?
You didn't mean to do it, but instead of saying bilingual, you said bilingual. So it's really trilingual because you're saying it with a southern accent.
I'm trying to, as I said, I'm trying to talk more slowly. How do you say most interesting?
In Spanish or in
Spanish?
English?
I forget how you make it most. I used to know that, but I don't know anymore.
Wait, isn't it iste? But you can't do it for interesante.
Interesante
iste. Muy triste.
Más interesante, Justine says. Más. Doesn't más just mean more, though?
It does.
Well, that would be more interesting, but I want it to be the most interesting.
Más.
Más. I don't know what happened since we took our little break. I feel like we came back a little different. I'm not sure.
Look, I know I'm different because I'm really tired.
Yeah, maybe that's what.
But you,
I
can't make excuses for.
So, as we record this, it's New Year's Eve, or New Year's Adam, as Alice likes to call it, which was very clever. I really like that a lot.
Eve.
Yeah, you guys are hearing this in like February or something.
I know.
But that's fine. I do want to show everybody in the chat, Jason Blair, very generous man that he is, got some art.
Wait. Oh, mine's not in here.
Awesome?
I'll show it next time. He also gave me art, and it was so nice.
He's such a great guy. And I think Hannah Hill is the one who did this, which she is amazing.
Same.
She is incredible. But thank you, Jason Blair. You're awesome.
It was like the only present I got this year that I didn't buy myself. Look, don't feel sorry for me. I bought myself presents, but, you know.
Life is a present.
Well, I have to say, Squanto gave me a present. It was actually very sweet. It was just a flameless candle that he found at the deli that he went to go eat at.
That's nice.
I was like,
I'm actually,
where did this come from?
My daughter got me this Alabama elephant Santa Claus Let It Snow shirt. So I'm wearing that.
That's a real present too. So other than my Hannah Hill art and my flameless candle that may have been swiped from a deli, those were my Christmas.
It's a thought.
Those were my Christmas presents.
Well, if you're listening out there, I do hope you're having a happy new year. It's funny because when we record these, I think of the year passing with our episodes, and in my mind, it's already February, which is like, how is it already February? It's not even 2025 yet. But what are you gonna do?
What are you going to do? Oh, my.
So I do want to say, if you haven't started following our Substack, I've been talking about it a little bit, True Crime Times, check it out. There's new articles up all the time from various people, lots of people from true crime, a lot of different sort of perspectives on things. Not just us. It's not just us. So those of you who don't like us, you can read other people. And I mean, presumably there won't be people who are being critical of us, but you never know. I mean, hey, we're a forum for truth. So if you want to write a well-written 1,000-word article on how terrible we are, feel free to submit it. We'll give it an honest review.
I think I'm going to submit a 1-star review right now. Like, what is Alice rambling about? Okay, we'll actually cut to the point. This is all going to get cut out of the episode.
No, it's not. This is all going to be in the episode. What are you talking about?
It should really get cut out.
This is my New Year's resolution.
What?
I want to take longer
episodes.
To get to the point.
You need to that's how you weed out people. I am so tired, but it's so joyful chaos, because I had 17 people at my house for the last week, which was wonderful, but I don't think I've ever been so tired in my life. One of those people was my newborn baby, so he definitely was the main cause of the tiredness, but you know, anyways, that's my excuse. I don't know what your excuse is.
He's allowed to make you tired though.
Yeah, he's great. You guys, I don't have favorites, but he's pretty great.
Yeah, he's pretty awesome. Okay, well, Alice is pushing me to go ahead and start, so I'm going to do that.
Frankly, I just really actually want to know what happened in this case.
This case is fascinating. It's funny because the outline keeps getting longer because I keep adding things to it. But this is a fascinating case. And want to sort of reorient you as we go into this. I know there are a lot of names in this and it can seem confusing. So here's what you need to know as we go into episode 2. We're talking about a shooting that happened, and we're talking about whether Pablo Velez was involved in that shooting. So the night before the shooting, which sets all this up, Adrian Payan, he is beaten up by 3 guys, Jason Woolley, Richard Shorty Cisneros, and Ron Strandberg. And he's beat up by these 3 guys at the Perfect Rack bar. So the next night, Adrian's girlfriend, one of his girlfriends, because we know he has many, Claudia Beltran, calls him up, actually a couple times, and says, the men who beat you up are here. She wants him to come take revenge or whatever. So he actually comes twice. The first time he actually does come with a guy named Chris. We should have trusted ourselves. He comes with a friend named Chris. Chris falls away. Don't worry about Chris. He doesn't see the people who beat him up, so he comes back the second time, and he brings backup his friends Esteban Rodriguez and Emerson Bajorquez. So Adrian sees Jason Woolley outside the front door of the bar. This is one of the guys who had beaten him up the day before. He's walking up to him, he's going to do whatever he's going to do, and Jason Woolley sees him. Now, Jason is wearing a red shirt. He is referred to throughout the trials as the red shirt shooter. He sees him coming. He knows what's coming. He fires his gun into the ground. He will say that he did that just to scare everybody. That's his take, though this whole thing feels like an ambush. But he fires his gun into the ground. At this point, when he does that, 2 other men start shooting. We actually know there are 2 others because of some shell casings that are in various places around the parking lot. So now there are 3 people shooting. Adrian Payan, he is hit as he's running away. So is Emerson Bajorquez. So after this happens, you have now 2 people shot. Jason Woolley, he was one of the group of 3 who beat him up the night before. He's arrested for his part in the shooting. One of the shooters, at least by the police, is never identified. The other person arrested is Pablo Velez Jr., and this is based on his ownership of the gold vehicle, a gold Cadillac, that was present at the shooting and fled the scene and was chased down by Claudia and one of her friends. And Claudia also makes an identification of him as being the shooter wearing a blue shirt. So you have the red shirt shooter, that's Jason Woolley, and we know that he is the red shirt shooter. And then the blue shirt shooter we're trying to identify, and she says it's Pablo Velez. Now, neither Richard Shorty Cisneros nor Ron Strandberg, they're never arrested for anything in this case. However, the theory of the prosecution is always that all four men were involved. So they were never able to prove it when it comes to Shorty Cisneros and Ron Strandberg. But in their mind, there were four men involved in this incident, three shooters, and one of the shooters is Pablo Velez. And we talked a lot about the timeline last time. Today, we're going to get into the investigation and sort of the things that led them to believe this.
So the reason this is confusing is because of all the people involved. But actually, it's pretty straightforward, right? This all takes place at a bar, and these things happen pretty frequently. There are fights at bars, people get offended, they want to come and take some revenge. Usually it does not involve someone getting killed. But if you're confused by the names, hopefully that fantastic 5-minute, actually it was like a 3-minute recap helped you. Now let's move on to the investigation, because you've heard about this gold car a lot in last episode and you just heard about it now. Obviously, a gold car is a pretty awesome piece of evidence, particularly when you have the license plate. And that's what we have here. So like we said before, sounds like a pretty simple case, right? Well, the police immediately zoned in on this gold car because there's just not that many gold cars out there. And they found that the car was registered to Pablo. Now, the police created a photo array for their prime witness, Claudia. Remember, Claudia is one of the girlfriends who had called from the bar, basically drawing folks there. And then she's the one who followed the car as well. So you would think that she is going to be your best witness. Now, police asked Claudia if she saw the shooter in the blue shirt. Claudia said yes, and she pointed at the picture of Pablo in the lineup, saying, "He looks like him," though Claudia also said that he had lighter hair. Now, Claudia suggested that it could have been one of the people involved in the earlier fight. Of course, Pablo wasn't there for that fight. Now, despite these issues, the police would state at trial that this was a positive identification. As you can tell from that, that's pretty shy of a positive identification. And I want to take a step back for a second and talk about these photo arrays. Now, obviously, if you're the police and you have a license plate number and you know it's connected to Pablo, you're going to include Pablo in the photo lineup because that's a huge piece of evidence tying something from the crime to Pablo. So I absolutely agree with Pablo being part of the lineup. But it's kind of one of those false choices situations because Claudia definitely saw someone. Now, whether the person she saw is one of the, I don't know, about 6 or so people is usually what we put in a lineup. Usually it's not many more than like 7 or 8 because then that gets a little too confusing. Chances are she's like, well, I saw someone. And when you put pictures in front of someone, they tend to feel the need to select a picture at all, even if it's not the person they saw. Your brain tries to pick the closest thing that you see. And so the fact that Pablo's included in this lineup, not surprising whatsoever. That's good police work. But the fact that he's picked, I don't even really think it's a positive pick that he's pointed to, says a lot less. Almost never, when we show witnesses a photo lineup, do they fail to pick anything. They may do what she did, which is point at someone and say, it kind of looks like this person. I don't know, maybe, kind of, not really. But rarely, almost never, do I have the witness say completely, none of those people are the person I saw. That rarely happens, and I think it's because we all tend to want to affirm and our brains want to make the connections. And when we're given choices in this world, we're kind of living in a rational world where we think if the choices are given to me, then the person I saw must be one of these pictures, even if you unconsciously think that. So that's just kind of a background on photo arrays. And
they always say, I mean, one of the standard sort of instructions to the witness is the person may be here, or they may not be. But everybody knows it. One of those people is the suspect, right? I mean, the police aren't just showing you 6 random photos just to see whether they can trick you. They're not doing that. So you know one of them's there. And so the tendency is to pick the person who looks the most like the individual. And I mean, even at random, 1 in 6 chance is not terrible, I mean, it's not great. It's Russian roulette. but it's not a terrible chance that you're going to pick the quote unquote right person. And the other thing, as we're going to see as we go through this, the police told her, she gives a description of this person. And we're going to talk about that in a second, of what this person looks like. And the police tell her, everyone in this photo lineup fits the description that you gave. You just need to tell us, are any of these people actually that person? That is a questionable assertion by the police, as we're going to see. The other thing, this question of how definitive was the choice. So the police, there are 2 officers who testify about this. One of them says it took her 4 seconds. She seemed pretty sure to me. She said this whole thing about it looks like him, but I think his hair was lighter. I also think he was one of the people in the fight the night before, which probably wasn't. But they're like, you know what? It looks like him's good enough for me, and they go with it. The other officer just gets up on the stand and just perjures himself. He says that she came in and she actually said, "This is a beautiful lineup you have here." It's like, which is a weird thing to say, right? And I remember I was reading this part of the transcript and just thinking, this is very strange. Like, why would she say that? Well, it turns out later on they find out he wasn't even there when this happened. So he just got on the stand and just lied about her identifying Pablo. Now, the other officer was there, and he is presumably telling the truth about how it went down. But it's just one of those things that it's just surprising when you see that. But it was funny how immediately it stood out because of what the officer was saying, that it just didn't fit with reality. And then come to find out, as you're looking through the record, that later on they discovered he wasn't actually present for that. So, the thing I always think about, Alice, and we've talked about this before, is your photo lineup in that one case we did. That was just...
It was so good.
Just the worst.
So bad.
It was so bad. It was the worst photo lineup ever. There was,
so usually,
it was 6. You go into
it was 6. So usually, this is not surprising. When you have the guy you think it is, you try to pick other people with similar characteristics. So if your suspect has a beard, the lineup is supposed to have like pretty much a bunch of guys with beards, right? Or if the person is like white, you don't want just one white guy in the photo lineup and 5 guys who are of other clearly not white ethnicities, right? And mine was just like, it was like blaring. I think the witness was like, he had a beard or he was bald, and every other person had a fro.
Something about his hair.
Yeah, like there was like 5 photos with like people with massive fros and one bald
and then
guy.
One bald guy.
And they're like,
I
guess it's
obviously.
the bald guy.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh God.
And by the way, the reason you can't do that is that's something you totally would challenge in like cross-examination about how good the photo array was, how leading it was, best is to have it not be that way.
And I'll say this, and we talk about this sometimes when we're giving practice tips for defense attorneys. So these defense attorneys were very litigious, and they just demanded I think it was a detention. Was it a detention hearing? It was a contested preliminary hearing of some sort. And so during this hearing, this whole photo lineup comes out, and it's just obvious that like
we didn't know about it before.
Yeah, we'd not actually looked at it because you just sort of trusted the police.
You got a positive identification. That's all
right.
you need.
So then in this hearing, it's like blown up. It's on the screen. And the great thing was we were able to get through the hearing. And then it was like, okay, well, we're not using that at trial. That is terrible. That is not only not a good lineup, but if a jury sees that, they're going to laugh us out of the courtroom. So we ended up having to do it another way.
Important that day. And it helped us for trial.
Exactly. And so we talk about this sometimes with like the Richard Allen case and various things where you demand an evidentiary hearing for a motion you're going to lose. You can learn stuff as a defense, but typically you should know everything already because we're supposed to turn over all the discovery to you, right? So you should have a pretty good idea of what our case is. You're a little bit more of a mystery to us, particularly what your strategy is going to be and what your tactics are going to be. So by doing that, they really lost something that could have been valuable. I mean, we would have obviously looked at the photo lineup before trial and probably would have said, this is terrible. But nevertheless, it was good to see it. So anyways, that's just to say, these photo lineups are fraught. The only other time I think our case, one of the cases we covered on the show, was the Temujin Kinsu one. And in that one, the picture of Temujin Kinsu was completely different from the other ones. So you had like a bunch of like washed out, blurry photographs, and then one like crystal clear photo of Temujin. It just jumps out at you. And of course, you know, that's going to be the picture you're going to pick. And you're trying to avoid that. I mean, I guess if you're trying to just get the guy, you're not trying to avoid that. But if you're trying to actually find out, did they do it? And this is part of your investigation. You don't want to subtly indicate to the witness, hey, this is who you're supposed to pick. It's like the horse that learned how to count or to add. You know about this horse? So this is another aside. There was this horse who was like in, you know, Barnum and Bailey, whatever, circus. And the thing was he could add. So they would like write 3 + 7 on the board. And then the horse would stomp however much it was. So he'd stomp 10 times to show that it's 3 + 7. And they couldn't figure out how the horse does this. How does the horse do this? Because presumably the horse is not adding. Well, so some scientists looked at it and they realized that when he got to the number, everyone watching held their breath because they were like, is he going to get it or is he going to go? And the horse picked up on that. So the horse was just reading what the people watching were expecting. And once they held their breath, that's when he stopped because he knew that's what they're looking for. And it's the same type of thing. You're trying not to give any kind of subtle clues of like, you know, it's that guy.
I was about to kind of critique you and be like, well, here come the 1 stars saying, here you have an aside. That is such a fascinating example of what I think our witnesses are doing and why a really good interrogator does not give signs like that to the witness and doesn't lead them in a way that could ultimately confuse the witness if they do have usable information, but then also are seeking to please because we just as humans want to please and want to help. And so I have definitely seen more junior agents do stuff like that where they'll be like, oh, so that detail of your story is really interesting. And they hone in on that detail when the person's like, oh, I didn't really see that much, but you really want to know more. So I'm just going to kind of make stuff up. And we see that happen. Oftentimes I have to take a break and be like, hey, you need to take a step back. Like, let's just let them tell the story. But that horse story, I'm going to use that story forever. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, I just made it up on the spot. No, it's true.
And is that even smarter than adding, though? I think it might be.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's like,
I actually think that's smarter.
If you can add. That's amazing. So we have this photo lineup. And so now, hey, you're the prosecutor. You got a pretty good case here, right? You have eyewitnesses who see the car drive away. The car is in Pablo Velez's name. Your key witness is saying that's the guy. Going to trial, right? So as you would expect, Claudia was called to the stand in Pablo's trial. And she was asked, do you see the person that was in the blue shirt sitting in the courtroom today? Claudia's response, as you might expect, was no, she did not. Now, what's interesting about this is the prosecution anticipated this was going to happen. In fact, they knew it was going to happen because Claudia had already told them that she did not think Pablo was the guy. And basically, she was going to get on the stand and say, the defendant is not the person I saw. So in their opening statement, the prosecutor actually says, Claudia Beltran, when she testifies, I'm going to anticipate that she will probably testify that she will not be able to identify the defendant in the courtroom. That's a problem, right? And it's the kind of problem that obviously the prosecutor is trying to address in the opening statement because she knows that's almost a Matlock moment, right? You ask that question and you get a no. What's the jury going to think? So she's trying to say, look, this is probably going to happen. And she said, there's reasons for it. It's been 2 years since the event. When she talked about this with an officer, it was much closer to the event. The problem is that the issues with Claudia's identification seem deeper than mere forgetfulness. I'm actually going to read you some of her testimony in a second. But Claudia had described the shooter. Now I'm saying, the police said everyone in this photo lineup matches your description. Almost giving her, which frankly they probably shouldn't do, I mean, I guess, I don't know. That's an interesting one, because is that priming her to think this is one of the people? But anyways, they told her, this person's going to match what your description is. Claudia had described the shooter as short, just a little taller than her, maybe taller than her. She was 5'4". She basically said, look, 5'3", 5'4", maybe a little taller. She described Pablo as much, when she was telling the prosecutor the problem, as much taller and much heavier than the person she saw. Basically, she saw a little guy, 5'4", doesn't weigh a whole lot, with light hair. That's what she described. Pablo has darker hair, and not only was he taller, he's 6 feet tall. So, height is a weird thing. And we've talked about this sometimes, that when you're describing height, you can just get it radically wrong, right? Anything really between 5'5" and 5'10", even, maybe even a little bit taller, maybe even a little bit shorter, you can mess up. But when you get to 6 feet, or when you're approaching 5 feet, those extremes, I feel like that's when you can start to rely more on what the person's saying. It's never perfect. This was a stressful situation, but she's saying he's small, and you have Pablo who's 6 feet tall and weighs 230 pounds at the time. That's a lot. I mean, it's not a ton. I don't want to say it's a lot because that would indict myself. But, I mean, a bigger guy, right? A guy you would recognize as being
let's
bigger.
put it this way. Pablo is more like you, and she's describing someone more like me.
That's a great way to
truly.
put it. Yes.
You guys can't
Almost
really see us because we're
perfectly.
sitting down, but if you saw us at CrimeCon, we are pretty opposites.
Yeah, that's a good point. That Christmas photo that I put up.
There you go.
And that is basically, I'm Pablo, Alice is the person that she's
Claudia
described.
saw.
So that's the difference. So I'm going to read you just how this went, because it's interesting if you ever get an opportunity to read the transcript, because most of the transcript is about everything else that happened. What she did that night, what happened the night before, her chasing the person down, having the Bible, writing down, I mean, all the really interesting stuff. They do all that. And then at the very end, they get to the identification. I mean, it's like just a little bit, right? So here's what she says. Okay, when you picked the two people out of the lineup, because she identified the other gentleman, the one who fired his gun into the ground, she'd also identified him. He is the red shirt shooter. Yes, Jason Woolley. So she identified him. They had a 6-pack. He was in it. He was the first one she identified, which, by the way, also the fact that she sees 6 photographs and she sees one guy who is definitely the first guy. And no doubt about that. Then they give her 6 more. We're looking for the second guy. She knows they expect one of those people is the guy. She knows that because she just saw 6 that had the first guy in it. So just the mind games here, which I'm not saying the police were intentionally trying to manipulate her, but just doing this stuff was manipulating her in some way. So this is, okay, when you picked the 2 people out of the lineup, out of the 2 separate lineups, about how long after the shooting did you pick them out? This is smart, right? Because we're saying closer in time, your memory was better. It was about a week or 2. So it was pretty close. Yes. Okay. And do you see the person that was in the blue shirt sitting in the courtroom today? So, she's already setting up, hey, back when you identified him, that was 2 weeks after. Do you see the person? But this is about 2 years after that has happened. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. And he looks different to you? Yes, from the lineup. Okay. I'll pass the witness at this time. So that's all she does. I mean, this is could not be just a more tighter description of this, a direct examination. And basically, she knows this is a problem. She's done the best she can. She doesn't want to spend a whole lot of time with her. If this is going to be brought out, the defense attorney is going to be the one to do it. He's going to have to cross her on this. I'm not going to give her any opportunity in direct to say anything other than he looks different now than 2 years ago. As you might expect, on cross-examination, Pablo's defense attorney spends more time on this. Now, I will say this about Pablo's defense attorney. Not the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, just reading, it's funny because you watch a lot of these recent trials, the Karen Reed case or the Richard Allen case, and there are always criticisms of the judges for keeping stuff out. The judge in this case just hammered the defense attorney, cut him off in the middle of his opening, and made him sit down. And his opening hadn't even gone that long, and the prosecution kept objecting and getting overruled, which was wasting time. But the judge nevertheless just cuts him off, stops him. The prosecution objects all the time to his questions, always sustained. half the time I couldn't figure out why. Like, I was like, I don't know what he's doing wrong here, but he was incapable of working around that. At one point, he objects to the prosecution, and he's like, the same objection she's been saying this whole time. And the judge is like, well, if that's your basis, overruled. And he had to figure out what it was she was doing. And when he did, he kind of figured out what her objection was. And then when he used that objection, the judge did sustain it. But just to say, Pablo, he did not receive an incredible counsel. Was he incompetent? Was he incompetent for the purposes of ineffective assistance of counsel? Probably not legally. And obviously there have been challenges based on that have failed. But I will tell you, he does not do as good a job as one might like of drawing this out. But I'm going to read you some of the back and forth. So he says basically, so you repeating what the prosecutor said. So it looks different. She says, well, he doesn't look like the person in the picture now. He's much bigger than the person that you saw? Yes. Isn't he? Yes. Is he much taller than the person you saw in the parking lot firing a long gun? He looks much taller. Much taller. And you think probably much heavier? Yes. Okay, so in short, you're saying that the person you saw in the parking lot firing a long gun with a blue shirt is not Pablo Velez. I can't tell if it was or wasn't him. Okay, he looks different now. Well, when you say he looks different now, what does that mean? He has a different look. See, you can see how he's messing up, right? Like, he's allowing her to basically say, when I say it's not him, I just mean he's changed. He's the same person, but he's changed. Now he's heavier. He grew 6 inches.
Rather than the obvious, which is, it's not him, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, really nailing her down on that. But he's giving her this opportunity, and so she says it. He's taller, he has dark hair. Okay, well, what color hair did the person have you saw in the parking lot? He didn't have, his hair wasn't that long. It looked like a light color. Okay, but he's Pablo Velez, taller than the person you saw in the parking lot. Objection, asked and answered. Overruled, which it had been asked and answered, but the judge is throwing him a bone. At one point, he gets one of these and he's like, I don't remember the answer. And the judge is like, well, that's not a reason. That doesn't mean you get to ask him again. I mean, just really not great. Yes.
And here's a really good example where as the attorney, all you're supposed to want to do is get the witness to state facts. You make the argument later. Do you hear how in this questioning where he goes wrong is he's essentially trying to make the argument within the cross-examination, allowing the witness to be like, well, let me explain myself. All you need to nail down, the person you saw, about your height, how tall are you? 5'4", okay? The person you saw weighed about how much you weigh? Okay, about what, 160? Okay, great. Did the person you see weigh over 200 pounds? No? Okay. Did the person you see look about 6 feet tall? No? Okay. Tell me more about the person that you saw. What color was his hair? I don't know, it was a light color. By light colored, can you say whether it is, give me a sheet of paper, and then do gradations? You don't have to say, and all of that is not the person you see in front of you, right? Because our brains want to be like, well, he just changed how he looks. It's been a couple years. He got fatter. I don't know. He's wearing like platform shoes. Who knows? That's all you do. Then on closing arguments is when you say, this is who Claudia saw. Boom, boom, boom. You know who's not boom, boom, boom? My client. That's what you do. But you see where he went wrong here.
And he already had her saying it's not him. She answered the question the prosecutor asked directly. Do you see him here? No.
Done.
You don't need to ask her again because he's doing what arguably the prosecutor should have done, which is giving her some ability to explain what no means. And Alice is right. If instead he had stuck to specific things, just really nailed down all those differences, then he gets up in closing argument and does exactly what Alice said. You tie all that together, you tell the story, then you get to conceptualize what she said instead of allowing her to say what she says in this situation. Interestingly, the prosecution does not redirect, which I think says a lot about the failings. Number one, that they really wanted to get Claudia off the stand. But number two, that the cross-examination just had not accomplished what it could have accomplished. And it was in many ways a failure. The other thing I don't understand that he didn't do, and maybe the judge at some point had said he couldn't do it, he never gives her an opportunity to identify the blue-shirted person, which is strange because everybody knows we're talking about 4 guys here. And for those of you patrons who are watching, we'll go ahead and put this up for you. So the other person, Richard Shorty Cisneros, his nickname is Shorty. We're looking for a short person. His photograph, if you compare his photograph to Pablo's, and of course the photographs are terrible, you'd think this happened in like 1976 and not 2004. They look very similar if you're just looking at their heads. And that's what's important about the lineup. So remember, what are the things about him that really define who this person was for Claudia? His weight, his height. She did not see the full body. They used driver's license photos. So the photo for Pablo is basically from his neck up. That's all she saw. Shorty Cisneros was not in the lineup, but she didn't get to see his entire body. And the other thing that's interesting about this, the police had actually created a videotape lineup that included Velez, that they could have shown to her, that included his entire body. And this was important because when she saw the shooter, she only saw him from the side. So she did not see the straight on look at him, which is what she's looking at when she's looking at these photographs. But they didn't show that to her. And you have to wonder why they didn't do it. And I think one reason that would make a lot of sense is because they were worried about what would happen if they did. Because the police knew how she had described the shooter. And they knew that Pablo did not fit that description. So they had to be concerned after they got her to say it's that guy. They probably were concerned if we do the full lineup, there's a chance she will say, actually, no, that's not the guy after all, when she saw him from head to toe. Now, I will say one more thing about this, because this is another thing everybody always forgets, and this could cut either way. Claudia was drunk when this happened. She had had at least 4 Long Island iced teas, which if you've ever had a Long Island iced tea, you know that that's a lot. A Long Island iced tea has at least 4 different kinds of liquor in it. So 1 Long Island iced tea is something. And she had had at least 4, maybe more, when this whole thing went down. So this is another thing that's affecting her ability to identify who the shooter was.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. You're right. We won't get through this today, but that's okay because this is very interesting. So another person that testified who's very important in this case is Adrian Payan. Now, he believed that the shooting was gang-related by members of the Texas Syndicate, which was a rival gang. Adrian also testified that he had identified Pablo as the shooter. But see, he's clearly mistaken, as he says the same guy he saw earlier that night at the Perfect Rack with the other men was Pablo. But whatever the case, Pablo could not have been present at that point if you followed our timeline from last episode, because he has telephone pings driving hundreds of miles away because he is a truck driver. So if he's seeing someone earlier in the night, it's impossible based on Pablo's pings that he could have been there. Now, so this makes the wrongful identification argument even stronger. But the defense attorney does another horrible and confusing job of bringing this out. And it's likely the jury actually missed the significance of Adrian's misidentification and instead thought Adrian had seen Pablo twice that night. And in fact, despite his testimony to the contrary, it doesn't appear that Adrian actually did identify Pablo as the shooter. According to a police officer who testified in the trial, the photo spread was shown to at least 4 witnesses in the parking lot, and only Claudia picked out Pablo, and even she said that the shooter just looked like Pablo. You heard her identification earlier. It was not exactly a positive identification. This, if you're doing cross-examination, what you want to do is basically point out the fact that he didn't make the identification at the time, especially if you have the prosecution with Claudia trying to say, oh, at the time she had a better memory of who the shooter was, and so her identification at the time had more weight. He never really identifies at the time, and he says something that's very key and very good for Pablo, your client, which is that he saw him earlier in the night. Pull out the telephone records. You could not have seen Pablo. There's no way that's the case. So whoever you saw, it wasn't my client, right? And that doesn't really come out here. Now, Payan also testified that the men who beat him up were not the shooters. Now, this appears strange at first since it's obviously wrong. But remember the situation. This is a gang shooting. Payan would rather not die. And, just because they're at trial here, the shootings aren't going to stop. And if you're members of your other gangs that are not on trial or not witnesses here. And in fact, years later, Payan admitted that he lied about seeing Pablo earlier in the night, and he lied about the shooters not being the men who beat him up. Totally self-interested. I don't think he was trying to get anyone convicted. He just cared about number one, himself. He's like, if I say who it was who shot me, well, dang it. Like, they're going to come after me because they're going to have beef.
And I know some of you sweet summer children out there are confused about this because it's like, Adrian's the victim. Why wouldn't he want justice to be served? Why isn't he saying exactly who shot him? That's just not the way it works. This was a gang shooting. That's what this was. He's in one gang. The Texas Syndicate is another gang. And you don't get justice through the police. He doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be testifying. He has been subpoenaed to testify. And the thing that's frustrating to me is the prosecution in this case had to recognize the situation. They had to see what was going on here. And they knew, even if the defense attorney is doing a very poor job, I mean, this would not have been hard, like Alice said. What time did you see him? Oh, you saw him at 10:30? Are you aware that he was 150 miles away at that time? Even if the prosecution objects, you've made your point, right? And frankly, that should get in. But the prosecution, they see this and they know. They're hearing this and they know that's not right. That he didn't see him then. They know, what are you talking about? It wasn't the guys who beat you up. Our whole theory is that it was the three guys who beat you up and Pablo. That's our whole theory. Why are you saying this? I mean, his testimony, it contradicts itself all over the place. He's lying about identifying. The other thing, he says that he identified Pablo as the shooter. In his testimony indicates that he identified both of them, is what he says. He didn't do that. The prosecution knows this. And the way this trial is going, I mean, this trial looks like what a lot of people say that other trials look like, where they claim people are wrongfully convicted. You have a situation where people are lying on the stand and the prosecution knows it, but they allow it to happen because it's good for their case. I mean, what Adrian says, if it's not picked apart by a defense attorney, is good for their case. And there are some lawyers, prosecutors, but all lawyers of all stripes, who just believe, look, we have an adversarial system, and my job is to put my witnesses up there. You're the one who's supposed to show that they're lying. You're the one who's supposed to pick them apart. And as we've said before, I don't think that is not how prosecutors should behave. I think prosecutors have a much higher responsibility to ensure that kind of thing doesn't happen. But in this case, the prosecution just doesn't do it. They allow this to happen. They allow this evidence to come out that is clearly misleading. So let's talk about the gold Cadillac. As we've said, gold Cadillac, great piece of evidence. And if Pablo is innocent, he is definitely guilty of having rotten luck. I will say this about this case. One thing people always say in innocence cases is there is no evidence that this person did it. They always say that. It's never true. And I don't think it's even that helpful to think about it that way, because if someone is convicted, there is a reason that 12 jurors decided they were guilty. And I think it's important to figure that out. It's a pretty good piece of evidence that Pablo is identified by someone who was present during the shooter as the shooter, and he just so happens to be the owner of the gold Cadillac that was there. That is a tough coincidence if you're Pablo. And it certainly is the kind of thing that could allow a juror to say, I don't know what all's going on here, but the gold Cadillac was there. That dude owned it. And the lady who was standing next to the dude who got shot says he was the shooter. So guilty, right? I mean, you can see how that would happen. But was it actually a coincidence? And was it really his car at the time? Now, we know that before the shooting, Ron Strandberg, who's one of these three that everybody agrees is involved in this, took the car to E-Race Performance to have a stereo installed. Now, he's not doing that out of the goodness of his heart. He is not installing that stereo for Pablo because he loves him so much, right? If he's doing that, he's doing it because he wants the stereo in the car. After the shooting, the victim's father actually drives by Ron Strandberg's house. And sure enough, parked outside was the gold Cadillac. Now, eventually, Ron actually asked Pablo to take the vehicle back. So Pablo gets the car back, and he notices a couple things that are interesting. Number one, he notices it doesn't have a license plate anymore. Ron, for some reason, has taken the license plate off the car. It also had the new stereo installed, which he didn't know about. Now, the police would later say, and there would even be testimony at the trial, that Pablo picked up the car the day of the shooting. This is obviously important because they need Pablo to have that car the day of the shooting. If he doesn't have the car, it loses some of its connection. But, and this is another thing the defense just totally doesn't seem to understand, this is impossible. It's not possible for him to have picked up the car on the day of the shooting. Remember, he doesn't get back home until well after midnight. And so if you think, well, maybe at midnight he drove over and got the car then, and then drove to the perfect rack and there was the shooting. Well, the one thing the defense did that was good is they called a witness who actually testified to dropping off Pablo at Ron's house to pick up the Cadillac. And he did not do that on July 15th. He didn't know exactly what the day was, but he knew it was on a weekend and he knew it was in the afternoon because he worked during the week. July 15th was a Thursday, so it's not possible that this person dropped Pablo off at that time. So I think something we can say for certain is if Pablo was in that gold Cadillac, it was still being driven by Ron. It wasn't driven by Pablo. So Ron would have had to have picked up Pablo or something at some point to take him to the perfect rack. And remember, Ron's a bouncer at the perfect rack. So it doesn't really make sense that Ron, in the middle of all this, which, by the way, we talked about the cell phone records before, no calls with Pablo, so nothing to set this up. So if Ron was going to come pick up Pablo, he would have to just intuit when Pablo was going to make it back in his truck. Remember, he's driving his truck. It's unclear when he's going to get home. Somehow Ron knew about that, drove over, picked up Pablo, took him back to the perfect rack, and then they drove off. Ron absolutely had the car on July 15th. Pablo could not have had it.
You can see how you can tell a really compelling story with those facts in closing by the defense, right? Clearly Ron's the guy. I'm being the defense right here. Clearly Ron's the guy, and he's trying to cover it up and pile it all back on Pablo because he knows that the car was seen by a lot of people because it's gold and there were people probably following him and there was a license plate. So he does his best, removes the license plate, gives the car back, trying to clean his hands of everything. That's a great story, and it sounds incredibly plausible, right? Okay, let's talk about the drive test because a police officer testified that it would take 28 minutes to drive from the trucking company to the pool hall. Now, the prosecution argued that since Pablo's drive log showed him returning at midnight, this was more than enough time for him to get home and get to the pool hall for the shooting. But there are some obvious problems with this. Okay, yes, we talked about this before. The drive log does say midnight, but we've also talked about how drive logs, which are written down, are unlikely to be the most accurate timestamps here, and certainly here. Let's say that Pablo did arrive home at that time. First, one must assume that Pablo drove directly from the trucking company to the pool hall. Now, this is obviously possible, but it begs the question whether Pablo would not have stopped by home to change out of whatever he was wearing to go out. He'd been on a long haul drive. He doesn't stop to go to the bathroom. He doesn't go pick up something to eat. He doesn't change his clothes. Rather, he goes to the trucking company and directly goes to the pool hall when, again, there's no cell phone records between him and really anyone at the pool hall to say, come here. How would he know to go there, for example? And another question would be, when did he get in the Cadillac? So did he drive his 18-wheeler to the bar? Because that seems to be a very, inconspicuous way to travel. But the bigger issue, Pablo didn't arrive back home until 1 o'clock. So though his drive log says midnight, we actually know that he didn't get home until around 1. Based on how far he was away and based on his cell phone pings. And we also talked about why you may fudge drive records, because for some reason he probably needed to finish that load by that day. And so that's probably why it was around number midnight. Now, could Pablo have then made it to the pool hall after he got home at 1? Yeah. But you have to assume that despite having nothing to do with the events of the night before, he essentially shows up just in time for the shooting. and somehow he knows there's a shooting or just has the worst luck in the world.
And this is another thing that bothers me about how the prosecution presented this case, because they know he didn't get home at midnight. You know, they use this evidence in the trial. They use his log. They introduce it into evidence, the fact that it says midnight. Then they have this drive test, which they know is not how this happened. Like, he didn't drive from the trucking company to the perfect rack. That just didn't happen. But they do the drive test anyway to do the 28 minutes. And it reminds me a lot, once again, and I feel like we talk about this sometimes, how, you know, the beats are the same, story's different, song's different, but the beats are the same. And a lot of the murders we talk about, I feel like when you start thinking about these kind of innocence cases, when you have one that feels like it might be legitimate, you start seeing the same thing. So in the Temujin Kinsu case, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out Inconceivable, Jason Usry's new podcast on that, you need to. Temujin Kinsu case, what do? They have this huge problem where Temujin has all these alibi witnesses putting him 9 hours away from the scene of the murder. And they know he couldn't have driven there in time. So what do? They introduce this idea, well, maybe he flew. No evidence that he flew, but they just throw it out there. And the reason they're doing that is because they want the jury to have in their mind something to kind of tamp down that possible doubt. Okay, well, I have doubt about how he got there. Oh, but maybe he flew. Oh, well, maybe he did. Well, there you go. So maybe that's not so much of a problem. He could have flown, right? And they do that even though it seems absurd. Here you have a similar thing. Pablo's timeline is so tight. So what they do is they have this guy do this drive test that nobody thinks happened. No one thinks it went down like this, but because you have the introduction of the drive time into evidence, it gives the jury this idea of, okay, he absolutely could have gotten there. So the argument of I was on the road isn't true. He could have gotten there. He left at midnight. It only took him 30 minutes. Man, he's got plenty of time. He probably scoped the place out. He probably set up. He probably knew exactly where he wanted to be for the ambush that was coming, right? I mean, there's all sorts of ideas that you can build into this. In the prosecution, the drive test, I don't know how much of a problem I have with that. I mean, whatever, he did a drive test. That's how much time it took. And that's perfectly reasonable evidence to put in. Fine. You want to do that? Fine. Maybe he did get picked up by the Cadillac and they drove there. I have a real problem with the 12 o'clock because they know, they have seen the evidence from the phone pings and they know how accurate those are. You know, this is not one of many various podcasts that likes to tell you that they're not accurate for their particular person that they want to be innocent. They know that he was not there by midnight. And once again, they're doing the whole, well, that's a defense attorney's problem. He can put that evidence in. No, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, if you know for a fact that what you're presenting isn't true, don't present it. But they presented it anyway. And it just really bothers me that they
that's
did
not how I would work. And because here's the thing. They're doing what I think is fine for the defense to do. Not because I think they have different standards of ethics is not the right word to use here, but let's say we're flipped. It's that the prosecution, let's say the drive record actually helps the defense and the prosecution presents the accurate information of the timeline. And for some reason, the drive record, which they know to be inaccurate, but actually helps the defense, they never introduce that. I think it's perfectly fine for the defense knowing that, you know, cell phone pings are really accurate, but to have a reasonable doubt type of information to bring up during cross-examination, I think that's fine for the defense to do. It is not okay because all the defense has to do is poke holes in the prosecution's theory. The prosecution's job is to put forth what they think actually happened, not piece together the best evidence for their theory of the case. It's what the evidence actually says happened. That's why I have a problem with the way they presented it, even though you see how there's like gray lines here. That's just not how I litigate, though, the way the prosecution has done here.
We have a lot more to go, so we're going to do 3 episodes on this. And this case is worth 3 episodes because this is a murder case. Somebody was murdered and somebody's in prison for 30 years for it. So we're going to do another episode on it. I think we will wrap up after episode 3. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this case so far, what you're thinking. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Add prosecutorspod for all your social media. I'm sure the discussion on the gallery is going about this case. Probably everybody's confused about who's who. I understand that. But hopefully now it's a little bit more crystallized for you exactly who the important players are in this case. As Alice said, in some ways it's complicated because there's a lot of people and a lot of moving parts, but in other ways it's very simple and straightforward. This is a gang shooting at a bar, and we're trying to figure out whether or not Pablo was involved or not. And we're going to talk more about that next week. Alice, do you have time for a question?
Absolutely.
You're a very, very busy person these days.
No, absolutely.
Okay, let's see what we got. So many questions. And once again, if you leave a 5-star review on any platform and leave a question, we will answer it. If you don't leave a 5-star review on Apple, email it to us. That's probably the best way we can see it. And some places don't actually let you leave a review. You just have to do the best you can. So shoot us that email. We'll go ahead and add it. Okay, so this person says, and I don't know how old this is, but just in case this is happening, it didn't happen a year ago, but it's happening in 30 days. We're going to go ahead and ask this. And I'm sorry, Marie Louise, if this actually happened a year ago. So this person says, it's far enough down the list that it could be happening in a month. I have a job interview on January 31st with a software startup based in Birmingham. The co-founder I have the interview with went to Auburn. Red flag. As a Yankee from the Northeast, any advice? I'm going to let Alice
say Roll
answer
Tide.
This. Since Alice established earlier that she's from the Northeast.
I am not. But, well, number one, don't say Roll Tide.
Probably, yeah. Wear orange.
Okay, what kind of, wear orange. I think Birmingham is a really awesome town, and there are some really interesting startups there. I think it's just like any other startup type of interview you're going to have, which is that those types of interviews, they really value like creativity, ingenuity. They don't want just like a rote, person who's like checkbox, boring, whatever. The reason they're startups is they've taken risks. But I think the special thing about being, say, in Birmingham versus San Francisco or even Austin, which still the South, but it's a different vibe than Birmingham, is that people do value in getting to know you as well. I think that's interviews across the board, kind of in the Alabama area. So take the time. If the conversation goes towards like just getting to know you types of things, like talking about where you went to college and sports you played and, your cousin who went to Auburn, something like that, go with it. Because I remember doing interviews down south and I'd be like, they never even asked me a single substantive question, but it didn't matter because they really wanted to know who I was, because you can get a lot of smart people, but do you have the smart person you want to be in the trenches with? And I do think people in the South tend to take the time to want to get to know that. So if you haven't had your interview, go with the flow. Really try to enjoy the conversation as opposed to just trying to give the right answers.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think knowing sort of who you're interviewing with is so important, because it is true, not to be stereotypical or to stereotype, but it's just true that in the South, interviews just are so much more often chit chat. They're not, like Alice said, oftentimes they have nothing to do with the job. I mean, you're just like talking with somebody. The question,
I bet you were asked this. I never asked you if you were asked this, but we both obviously became prosecutors in the same office, but we didn't know the other one was interviewing there. So my interview was, done by the head honcho, the head prosecutor, shall we say. And the only question he asked me, had nothing to do with how many cases I'd tried, which is not zero, Reddit. And, like where I went to school, my grades, my favorite class, why I want to be a lawyer. Those are all very typical interview questions. He was quiet the entire interview and he asked one question. And the question he asked was, did you play any sports in high school? High school was like 20 years ago.
I got that question.
And the reason he asked that question, he told me later on after I got the job, was, I know you're impressive. That's why I brought you in to interview you. I wasn't going to interview anyone who I didn't think could do the job substantively, but I wanted to know if you'd ever played team sports, because being a prosecutor is absolutely having to be part of a team, and you're head of a team because you have to oftentimes help lead investigations and direct resources in a certain way to push a prosecution forward. So it actually is a fantastic question, but on the outside may have seemed like a quote unquote waste of time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, and that's just the way it is. So I think that probably, if your interview was a year ago, I bet that's how it went. If it's in 30 days, then
good luck.
Okay, I got one more. This one will be easy, Alice. This is from Horse Girl. Is obviously your
horses.
Spiritual sister.
Yes.
I am a forensic accountant currently working in family law. What experience do you both have working with forensic accountants? and I'll just let you gush.
I love forensic accountants. I am so serious. And Brett says,
yeah, they're awesome.
They are amazing. Talk about like the coolest detectives ever, because you follow the money, you will find everything. I took a lot of the money laundering aspects of most of our cases, so I worked a lot with forensic accountants. And even now in the private sector, I work a lot with forensic accountants on fraud cases. I forget the question. I was just going to say how cool your job is.
Have you worked with them, and what do you think?
Yeah, right there. Worked with them a lot. And truly, they are actually the ones, because we talk about like how accurate is a cell phone ping? How accurate is your drive log? When it comes to forensic accounting, it is so precise, and you can show everything with paperwork because of the way money travels. And so it is my favorite witness or expert to have on the stand, because you can nail down the facts, and it is so hard to wiggle out of it when you have the facts against the defendant. Whoever, if they're on your side, if the facts are on your side, it's fantastic, because there's really little wiggle room when it comes to forensic accounting. And you guys are so good at what you do. You can find ways of analyzing the money that I would never understand, even though we're looking at the same bank records.
And another thing they're really good at is, or the best ones are at least, is the way they can present the information to a jury. They are so good. You know, we talk about lawyers. An important thing for lawyers is being able to break down complex concepts for people who aren't familiar with it. Those guys, forensic accountants, because you can imagine how confusing that would be, like 1,000 different bank accounts and all this money going in these different places. And we're just so good at, like a chart, just a perfect chart can just nail a defendant, right? Where you just watch the money go exactly where it should be going if the prosecution's theory is correct. Like if they are doing this, you should be able to see the money. Oh, there it is. And they're great witnesses. So usually they're one of the last people you put on for these fraud cases, and they nail it. So,
and they're unflappable. Because, I mean, I think accountants by training are just, you guys are so good at it, but you are unflappable by the theatrics of attorneys, because numbers are on your side. And so even when an attorney's flapping their arms and screaming at you, you're like, well, actually on page 56 of the Wells Fargo bank account ending in 345, you can see right what you're saying is wrong. And then the attorney's like, well, darn.
And lawyers are so bad at math and all that stuff anyway.
So bad.
That they just look. It is so hard for a defense attorney to cross-examine someone, because you're right. I mean, they just can't. They can't do it. And what you really need, you have to have your own forensic accountant. Like if you're a defense attorney, you need your own forensic accountant.
It needs to be battle of the experts.
Yeah, that's what it needs to be, because if it's the lawyer versus accountant, the lawyer's going to lose every time.
And my favorite, our latest forensic accountant who was on the stand, the defense attorney was flapping and screaming and everything and said, these numbers just don't add up, something like that, something theatrical. And then the best part was like, I think he was like, here, I have a calculator for you. You add it up. And the forensic accountant was like, I don't need a calculator. It was just like such a smackdown. Like, I can do math in my head. Anyways, great question. You have a really awesome job.
Okay. Well, send us some more questions. We enjoy answering them. Let us know how the job interview went. Okay. Thank you, guys. I know we went a little long and maybe talked a little too much this episode. I don't know. I mean, I think that's what people come to podcasts for, is to listen to us talk, but I could be wrong. So we'll be back next week and we will wrap up Pablo's case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
My kids and all my nieces and nephews at 1 a.m. because there was a tornado that ripped through here. You okay? Oh, you can't hear me.
Sorry, I missed what you were
No.
saying.
I just said you can't hear me. I was explaining why I was waking up all these kids at 1 a.m.
Oh, it's a tornado.
Because of the tornado.
Tornado
That came through here.
Yeah.
Nothing says Christmas like a tornado.
I've decided we talk too fast. I think we should talk slower. I think we should be
We talk too fast? Okay, we can slow down.
Well, not that slow. We also have an ad.
Because
I
remember,
feel
I
like
always
we
talk
listen
too
too
fast.
much to the critics. I didn't mean to do that, but now I feel like we
Wait,
did
about
it.
what? Talking how
About
fast?
I don't know, not
Did we talk
getting to
too
the
slow?
point.
What?
Because now we take longer. We take more episodes.
When a shopper places an order, you have one shot at winning them as a lifelong customer. I'm Al Coe, CEO of ShipStation. I'm obsessed with ShipStation being the most reliable and efficient way you can ship. At ShipStation, our promise is to make shipping easier for e-commerce business owners. We're focused on providing the most integrations with all the places you sell and automating manual tasks to make fulfillment easier for your team. We partner with all the major carriers to make sure you get the lowest possible rates because every dollar counts. So no matter what you're sending or where you're shipping to, ShipStation can get it there fast and keep your customers happy. See for yourself how ShipStation can reduce the time and effort you spend on order fulfillment. Go to ShipStation.com to sign up for your free trial. That's ShipStation.com.